On this Monday night, Nova Scotia's tragic storm.
It's a heartbreaking day for our province.
The discovery made in the search for 4 missing people and the destruction from torrential rains and raging floodwaters. While Greece's Prime Minister says his country is at war with fire. Israel's controversial judicial reforms become a reality. The uproar, unrest, and fears of what's next. Widening access to reproductive health care, the push for universal coverage of contraception in Canada, and the big business of Barbenheimer.
I bought my tickets months ago.
The blockbusters bringing people back to the box office.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There is news in Nova Scotia tonight about the 4 people whose vehicles were submerged in the unprecedented flash flooding over the weekend. RCMP say they have recovered the body of a 52-year-old man in West Hants, and human remains have been found in another area. Nova Scotia's Premier calls it a heartbreaking day.
We can rebuild roads and bridges and buildings, but we can't bring people back. And the legacy for these floods will be the incredibly tragic loss of life.
Much of the province has been dealing with catastrophic flooding caused by heavy rain. 2 children and 1 youth remain unaccounted for tonight, and the damage to roads and bridges is still being assessed. Mike Armstrong has our top story tonight.
It is draining for searchers, both physically and emotionally. The 4 people swept away Friday night disappeared in the same area. At any one time, more than 60 people have been out looking for them in the hot sun.
There's multiple members in full-body wetsuits and protective equipment in that area, and that heat is definitely taking a toll.
The water levels are still high in some places, but it's the sort of flooding people are used to in the spring. What happened this weekend was different. The swath of precipitation that moved over Nova Scotia dumped 200 millimeters of rain on some areas. What would normally fall over an entire summer dropped in half a day. The Premier says just one fire department responded to more than 100 rescue calls.
A lot of people stepped up, and their efforts saved lives, for sure.
I was just here by myself with my friend and our 2 toddlers.
Janelle Bonus knew quickly when the floodwaters started to rise Friday, she had to get out, because what she didn't know was where the water would stop.
And we can see there that where the water line is.
So literally to here?
Yeah. This was the laundry room.
This is completely finished, the basement?
A completely finished basement. So then that was the playroom. So we had a bar, we had a couch.
Ripping everything out and repairing their home will cost the Bonus family tens of thousands of dollars, which raises the question of insurance.
We're just waiting to see what's covered.
That's a tense time.
Yeah.
The storm damaged or destroyed more than 50 roads and 25 bridges. Some have been able to reopen. For others, it will take longer. This is the main rail line from the Port of Halifax to the rest of Canada. CN says it had preemptively closed a section of tracks Friday because there were warnings about flash flooding. Now, crews were emptying this sewage pump station Monday after it was flooded and the pumps were damaged. People are being told to avoid the water at the local lake and are being asked to reduce how much they flush down their drains until the system can be brought back online. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Halifax.
In BC, there is no reprieve for firefighters. Hundreds of wildfires are still burning, and they've moved south. An out-of-control fire is now burning near Kamloops. More than 500 properties are under some form of an evacuation alert because of the Ross Moore Lake fire. It doubled in size in 24 hours. The city is reminding people to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. British Columbia is in the midst of its worst wildfire season on record. About 1.5 million hectares of land has burned so far. And in Greece, where extreme heat has lingered for weeks now, authorities are scrambling to carry out the largest fire evacuations in that country's history. Firefighters are battling to control blazes on the island of Rhodes, a popular vacation spot. About 19,000 people, most of them tourists, have been forced to flee. People are reporting chaotic scenes. In some cases, evacuees crowded to board small boats arriving to take them off the beach.
Hell on earth. Never thought I'd be caught up in something like that. There's someone's going to end up dying out there, seriously. There are thousands of people that are still out there.
One death has been confirmed on the island of Evia, which has issued an evacuation order along with the island of Corfu. On Greece's mainland, firefighters are fending off a growing blaze near Athens. The Greek Prime Minister says the country is at war with fire, and several European countries have deployed emergency crews to help. Well, it is no secret Canada spends billions on subsidies to the oil and gas sector, and for years there have been promises to reduce or eliminate them. Today, the federal government revealed its plan to phase them out. As Mackenzie Gray reports, critics call it a half measure, and exactly how much money in subsidies will be eliminated will be hard to track.
Shut the car stands down all the time. They're protests Stephen Guilbeault are used to, even when he's meeting a key government promise.
I'm absolutely thrilled today to be able to announce the publication of the framework and guidelines for eliminating inefficient fossil fuel subsidies in Canada.
The plan, first pledged at the G20 in 2009, has 6 different exemptions that would let federal subsidies continue, including for projects with Indigenous ownership and proposals with a credible plan to achieve net zero emissions by 2030.
We are heavily concerned about the criteria that have been developed. There are significant loopholes as well.
Those loopholes? Current federal tax credits for oil and gas exploration won't be changed, and crown corporations like Export Development Canada aren't subject to these rules. From 2018 to 2020, EDC averaged $13 billion a year in support for oil and gas companies, a decision the Environment Minister defended.
They've reduced substantially those fossil fuel subsidies by billions of dollars, while increasing by several billions of dollars their support for clean technology.
And there was disappointment from the Liberals' political partners. Phasing out public fossil fuel financing is a part of the government's deal with the NDP.
We can't take baby steps when we are facing wildfires and extreme flooding and heat domes.
Despite not saying how much less oil and gas companies would get from the federal government, some environmental groups are still applauding the move.
The impacts that we are experiencing across the country today are the result of the activities from fossil fuel companies. They should not be receiving the transfers of public dollars to fuel the activities causing the climate crisis.
We reached out to a number of oil and gas organizations, but they declined our request for an interview. But they didn't seem too concerned about the new rules, Donna. One of the organizations labeled it as meh.
All right, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you. A shakeup of federal cabinet ministers is expected this week. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in private meetings today, and several ministers have had their agendas cleared. Mental Health and Addictions Minister Carolyn Bennett confirmed this morning she will not be seeking re-election. And she is among several ministers expected to be replaced in cabinet in what one source tells Global News could be a significant shuffle. It's expected to take place Wednesday. A 28-year-old Edmonton man arrested by British police at Heathrow Airport in London last week has now been charged under the UK's Terrorism Act. The British Crown Prosecution Service says Khalid Hussein was charged with membership in a proscribed organisation. In a statement, Global Affairs Canada says only that it is aware a Canadian citizen in the UK has been charged with a terrorism-related offence. Consular officials are providing consular assistance. The man is charged alongside 56-year-old British preacher Anjem Chowdhury, who the prosecution claims spoke weekly to online groups giving lectures on the establishment of an Islamic State in Britain and how to radicalize people. In Israel, masses of people are blocking streets tonight, and authorities are using water cannon to try to disperse them. The people are furious the Israeli parliament pushed through a law earlier today limiting the Supreme Court's ability to overturn decisions made by government ministers. The U.S., Israel's closest ally, is disappointed too, the White House saying it's unfortunate that the vote took place today with the slimmest possible majority. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government is the most right-wing and religiously conservative in Israel's history. And this is just the first in a package of planned judicial reforms. Goomansingh reports on the fury and what demonstrators are planning next.
Unrest and anger as Israeli lawmakers undertake a seismic shift in the nation's democratic foundation.
We were left with no choice but to go to nonviolent disobedience, and we're here to protect our democracy with our bodies.
Demonstrators chained themselves to whatever they could, including each other, blocking the road to the Knesset, ahead of Monday's vote to remove the Supreme Court's ability to strike down government rules based on reasonability. Tens of thousands marched on Jerusalem.
I'm so sad. I'm here for 3 days protesting and do everything I can.
Inside the Israeli parliament, the opposition yelled shame and walked out. Benjamin Netanyahu's government rests on the shoulders of a far-right coalition, giving his side the numbers to pass the contentious bills. Devoted friends, Canada and the U.S. urged the Israeli Prime Minister to seek broader consensus before going ahead with the reforms.
How far is the degradation of the judiciary in Israel going to go? It is not yet clear.
The legislation is just one element of a larger judicial overhaul package put on hold in the face of fierce opposition, though Netanyahu also faced pressure to act or risk losing his coalition. He now says he's willing to discuss the next phases. As night fell, more demonstrations and more clashes with police, this time in Tel Aviv. Both sides used the Israeli flag as their symbol as judicial reforms have divided the nation. The issue has even resulted in thousands of Israeli Defense Force reservists threatening to not show up for duty. A weaker Supreme Court could make it easier for the government to build more Israeli settlements in occupied territories, something Netanyahu's far-right coalition has already pledged to do. The change could also help the Prime Minister. He still faces corruption charges. An opposition party has already filed a court challenge on the judicial reforms legislation. Donna?
All right, Crystal Goomansingh in London tonight, thanks. Russian authorities accuse Ukraine of launching a drone attack on Moscow early this morning. Moscow's mayor says 2 drones struck non-residential buildings near the center of the city. There is no serious damage. Russia's defense ministry calls it a terrorist act and says the drones were intercepted and then crashed. Yesterday, Ukraine's government vowed to retaliate for a Russian missile attack on the Black Sea city of Odessa. And the UN is calling on Russia to resume a deal that allows grain to be shipped from Ukraine's Black Sea ports after Russia halted it last week.
With the termination of the Black Sea Initiative, the most vulnerable will pay the highest price, as when food prices rise, everybody pays for it. We're already seeing the negative effect on global wheat and corn prices, which hurts everyone. But this is especially devastating for vulnerable countries struggling to feed their people.
The Black Sea Initiative was brokered by the UN and Turkey as a way to keep grain flowing to developing nations. The U.S. Justice Department is suing the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, over a floating barrier on the Rio Grande River intended to deter migrants. Texas installed a line of wrecking ball-sized buoys along the river to stop people from crossing into the U.S. from Mexico. The lawsuit asks a court to force Texas to remove the barrier. The Biden administration says the floating barricade raises humanitarian and environmental concerns. It's the latest escalation of a Texas border security operation that includes razor wire fencing and arresting migrants on trespassing charges. British Columbia does it. Now there are calls for the federal government to follow suit and provide universal coverage for contraception. Coming up, we'll talk to the doctor behind the petition. There is a debate underway in Canada about universal access to free contraception. Right now, BC provides it, but in many provinces, it depends on whether you have insurance. Sarah often speaks with a Calgary doctor trying to change that. She's launching a federal petition for universal coverage.
It's just like the 3-4 days and then you're good. But is that typically not the case?
It's a conversation this Calgary doctor is trying to reframe. Birth control, she says, isn't about sex, but about having a reproductive life plan, one she believes every Canadian should have reliable access to.
In Canada today, there exists an inequity, right, in individuals being able to access that life of self-determination.
But for now, that access depends on where a person lives, the type of clinic they use, and whether they have insurance. BC passed legislation this spring to cover the cost of birth control pills, contraceptive injections, IUDs, subdermal implants, and emergency contraception medication. And while Dr. Tour would like to see other provinces follow suit, what she's really pushing for is a federal policy for universal coverage.
I'm a really strong believer that reproductive rights are human rights, simply put, right? And they're just too important to be left at the whim of changing provincial governments.
There's an economic argument to be made too. Public policy agency Action Canada suggests every dollar invested in birth control saves more than $7 in managing unintended pregnancies. As part of a statement, the Office of Canada's Ministry of Health says everyone has the right to safe and consistent access to sexual and reproductive health care. This is why we withhold transfers to provinces that fail to make abortion and sexual and reproductive health services safe and available. And while that's the case now, some feminist scholars suggest that could change based on the ideology of whichever party is in power.
Currently, the federal government has both withheld and clawed back health transfers because of a lack of access to abortion in particular and other forms of reproductive health. And so that's great, but again, it's overly politicized.
The NDP has long pushed for universal coverage, and as part of their supply and confidence deal with the Liberals, the federal government has until June of 2025 to develop a list of essential medications to be covered under a national pharmacare plan. Some suggest birth control could be a symbolic first step. Sarah Offen, Global News, Calgary.
Ahead, the search for possible unmarked graves in the basement of a Catholic church in Manitoba. An excavation is getting underway at a Catholic church near a former residential school in Manitoba. A search using ground-penetrating radar found 14 anomalies beneath the church's dirt floor on the First Nation about 400 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg, indicating the possibility of unmarked graves. Melissa Ridgen takes us to the community.
It began with a sunrise ceremony at Our Lady of Seven Sorrows Church.
We have to start our processes based on our culture, based on the ceremonies that we know, how to create safe space. We create safe space with ceremony so that people can come into the space and feel comfortable and feel like they're being taken care of.
Community and church leaders alongside forensic anthropologists.
They're all small steps that people take, along that road of reconciling with the past and building relationships with one another.
This team from Brandon University will search down here, under the church.
My grandmother came for 3 years, and she would tell us stories too, like when we were little kids, and scary stories.
Ground-penetrating radar found 14 spots of interest under the basement of the church, adjacent to the Pine Creek Residential School that operated here from the late 1800s until 1969.
We'll also be looking for anything, right? Are there any animal bones? Are there potential archaeological artifacts or cultural materials? So all of that will be mapped and documented and photographed.
The team will set up tomorrow and carefully start digging under each of these markers. It's expected to take 4 weeks to complete the search.
RCMP are watching this project as it unfolds. Chief Derek Niepenak says whatever this excavation in this church basement does or doesn't reveal, it's about healing and moving forward. It's to clear up questions and doubts.
The search, an assurance that this generation will know the truth of whatever this church holds.
I met with an elder last week and he told me those kids there need to hear the kids here.
For unknown children resting somewhere at this site, and for the 21 that the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation lists as having died here while attending. Melissa Ridgen, Global News, Minnigan-Zibi, Anishinaabe, First Nation, Manitoba.
Box office boom. Next, how movies about Barbie and the atom bomb are boosting the film industry. Before they were even released, they were being hyped as summer blockbusters, and all the promotion worked. The films Barbie and Oppenheimer couldn't be more different from each other, and yet their release drew tens of thousands of people to theaters to see both of them back to back. As Eric Sorensen explains, the Barbenheimer bonanza couldn't have come at a better time for Hollywood.
So which movie were they dressed up for?
Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer? Yeah. Of course.
Of course, they're kidding about that.
No, Barbie. Zoom in on the bag.
Across the country, Canadians weren't missing out on the most hyped movie weekend in years.
I am very excited.
Hi, Barbie! Hi, Barbie! Barbie's Canadian content notwithstanding,
it's almost too polite.
The Barbenheimer phenomenon couldn't be more quintessentially American. Barbie, symbol of America's creative fantasy, and Oppenheimer, America's real and destructive power.
All America's industrial might and scientific innovation connected here.
Do you guys ever think about dying?
The juxtaposition just so ludicrous, it brought out memes and t-shirts.
The Barbie font, and then obviously the mushroom cloud representing, Oppenheimer's destructive work.
What mushroomed were audience numbers in theaters. The North American box office saw Barbie bring in over $200 million Canadian. Oppenheimer more than $100 million. The opening weekend topped $320 million, and globally more than $500 million. There's never been a 1-2 opening weekend punch like it. Barbie was the biggest opening ever for a film directed by a woman, Greta Gerwig, and Oppenheimer broke records for an R-rated biographical drama.
It did incredibly well, even better than they were expecting.
But will it last? Striking Hollywood screenwriters have been joined by actors on the picket line. Soon enough, the upsurge in audiences could tumble if new movie production remains at a standstill.
Movies don't write themselves. You have to have actors in front of the camera. So this is going to be very important that this gets resolved. The sooner, the better.
Hey, leaving Barbie, girls.
More women turned out for Barbie. More men watched Oppenheimer.
I bought my tickets months ago.
A fusion of movie themes.
Detonator charged.
The 1940s atom bomb and the 1950s Barbie doll. The unlikeliest cultural chain reaction in American history. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Monday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is this pod or squadron of pelicans in Lockport, Manitoba. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.